The Vanishing Act. It started with little things. Kyle, the new guy in accounting, never joined for lunch, never made small talk, and somehow always managed to slip out of meetings without anyone noticing. No one paid much attention. Some people are just shy, right? But then, Monica noticed something strange. She stayed late one evening to finish a report and heard someone walking around, their footsteps heavy, almost dragging. Thinking it was Kyle, she peeked into the hallway. It was empty. But when she went back to her desk, there was a sticky note on her keyboard that hadn't been there before. It read, "I see you." The next morning, Monica confronted Kyle about the note, but he just smiled and said, "You shouldn't stay late. It's not safe." She laughed it off, but her unease grew when she found out that Kyle didn't clock out that evening, or any evening for the past week. In fact, HR later confirmed that Kyle had never been properly onboarded. He wasn't even in the system. When Monica pressed her boss for answers, they avoided her questions, muttering something about how the office had been weird ever since the old accounting lead disappeared 5 years ago. Kyle? He stopped showing up entirely. But Monica swore she saw him in the reflection of her monitor late one night, watching her. The lunch thief. Everyone in the office was annoyed about the missing lunches. Whole meals would vanish from the fridge, but oddly, it was never random, just one person's food at a time, usually for weeks. At first, people joked about it. The phantom strikes again. Someone quipped when Brian's lasagna disappeared. Then came the incident with Amanda. For weeks, her salads kept disappearing, so she decided to add a note to her next meal. "This is Amanda's. Do not eat." When it disappeared anyway, she replaced the note with another, "I hope you enjoy the laxatives I added." The lunch thief didn't steal again for 3 days. But on the 4th day, Amanda found her container back in the fridge, with her salad untouched but smeared in what looked like blood. Taped to the top was a photo of Amanda at her desk, taken from behind. She reported it to HR, but no cameras covered the break room. They told her it was probably just a prank. The next week, Amanda quit. Weeks later, her replacement brought in a meal with their name on it. It vanished the next day. The Cubicle Whisperer. Everyone hated working late in the office. It wasn't just the flickering lights or the strange groans from the old HVAC system, it was the feeling of being watched. Dana knew the stories. Employees swore they'd hear whispers coming from the cubicles when no one else was around. People blamed Jerry, a guy from IT who'd been caught eavesdropping on phone calls before his termination. Dana didn't believe in ghost stories, but one late night changed her mind. She was the last person on her floor, finishing a client report, when she heard it, a low, scratchy voice. It was so faint she thought it might be her imagination, until it said her name, Dana. She stood, peering over the walls of her cubicle. No one was there. The voice came again, clearer this time, "Behind you." She spun around, heart pounding, but found nothing but shadows. Terrified, she grabbed her stuff and bolted for the elevator. As the doors closed, she glanced back at her desk, and saw someone crouching there, staring at her. When security swept the building, they found no one. Later, Dana discovered that Jerry hadn't been terminated. He'd disappeared. The rumor? He never left the office. The desk drawer. Eric had been assigned the desk of an employee who left under mysterious circumstances. The guy, Frank, had cleared out most of his belongings but left one locked drawer. Facilities gave Eric the key and joked about how Frank was a character. Eric opened the drawer, expecting junk, but it was filled with notebooks. The first one was dated 2 years prior and described mundane work complaints. But as he flipped through the pages, Frank's notes became erratic. He wrote about feeling watched and how the new guy in marketing, Sam, wasn't right. He claimed Sam wasn't human, that he saw him blink with 2 sets of eyelids. In the final entry, dated the day Frank quit, he wrote, "He knows I know. I saw him watching me through the vents last night. I'm not safe here. You're not either. If you're reading this, run." Eric laughed it off as paranoia, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. That night, as he worked late, he glanced toward the air vent above his desk. For just a second, he swore he saw two glowing eyes staring back. The birthday card. At Lisa's office, birthdays were a big deal. HR would send out a card for everyone to sign, and they'd throw a little party with cake. Lisa liked her co-workers enough, but she wasn't close to many of them, so she was surprised when she got her birthday card back. It was filled with the usual messages, "Happy birthday," and "Hope it's great." But one stood out. It read, "You look beautiful when you sleep. Can't wait to see you tonight." Lisa laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But as the day went on, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she locked her apartment door and double-checked all the windows. She even slept with her phone in her hand, ready to call 911. The next morning, she brought the card to HR. They took it seriously, at first. But when they asked everyone in the office to confirm their handwriting, no one's matched the creepy message. Worse, several co-workers swore they hadn't seen the card in circulation before Lisa got it back. A week later, Lisa found another note in her desk. "You shouldn't have told." The janitor. Everyone liked Henry, the janitor. He was quiet, polite, and always kept the office spotless. But one thing bothered Erin: Henry never left. She'd work late sometimes and see him mopping the same hallway for hours, even after the floors were already shining. He never seemed to have a home to go to. One night, Erin had to stay late to finish a project. The building felt eerie with just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the HVAC. Around 9 p.m., she heard the familiar squeak of Henry's mop bucket. She peered out of her office to say hello, but the hallway was empty. "Henry?" she called. No answer. She went back to her desk, unnerved. An hour later, she heard the squeaking again, closer this time. She walked toward the sound, calling for Henry. The hallway lights flickered, and she froze. In the dim light, she saw the mop bucket, overturned, water pooling on the floor. A shadow moved just out of her line of sight. Erin backed up, heart racing, and ran to the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Henry in the hallway mirror. Only it wasn't Henry, it was something much darker, grinning at her with impossibly sharp teeth. The buddy system. The company introduced the buddy system for safety reasons after a string of late-night incidents, things falling, computers turning on by themselves, even a chair rolling across the breakroom floor on its own. Employees were required to leave in pairs if they worked late. Megan and her buddy, Rob, were the last ones in the office one Friday night. As they packed up, Rob suggested they take the stairs instead of the elevator. Megan didn't like the idea, but Rob insisted, saying he felt claustrophobic. The stairwell was cold and eerily quiet. As they descended, Megan felt the hairs on her neck stand up. On the third-floor landing, she stopped. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Rob just smiled. "It's probably nothing. Let's keep moving." But the sound, a faint scratching, like nails on metal, grew louder. Megan turned to Rob, but his face had changed. His eyes were blank, and his grin stretched unnaturally wide. He whispered, "We're not supposed to leave." Megan screamed and bolted down the stairs. When she reached the lobby, the security guard asked where her buddy was. "Rob," she yelled. The guard frowned. "Rob hasn't worked here in years. He died in this building," fell down the stairs. The cubicle artist. Sarah noticed the drawings almost immediately after starting her new job. On the inside of her cubicle walls, someone had drawn intricate designs with a fine black pen. Swirling lines, flowers, and faces stared at her while she worked. HR claimed the cubicle belonged to a creative type who'd been let go, so she didn't think much of it. But the drawings began to change. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but she started taking photos to compare. A face that had been smiling one day would be frowning the next. Flowers wilted. The swirling designs became darker, more chaotic. One day, Sarah noticed a new drawing, her own face. It was unmistakable, her short hair, her glasses, even the necklace she wore every day. She reported it to her manager, but no one believed her. HR swore the cubicle hadn't been touched since the last employee. That night, she stayed late, determined to catch whoever was messing with her. Hours passed, but no one came. Finally, she stood to leave, and froze. A new drawing had appeared on the wall in front of her. It was her again, but this time, her eyes were closed, and her mouth was stitched shut. The team meeting. Mark hated team meetings, especially the ones scheduled for Friday afternoons. But this one was worse than usual. No one showed up. He sat in the conference room alone, waiting for his boss, Julie, to arrive. The clock ticked loudly. After 15 minutes, he decided to leave, but as he reached for the door, it slammed shut. "Julie?" he called out, trying the handle. It wouldn't budge. The TV screen at the front of the room flickered to life. A video feed appeared, the empty office, viewed from above. Mark saw himself on the screen, sitting at the conference table. But as he watched, a shadow moved behind him in the video, something that wasn't there in the room. "Who's there?" he yelled, spinning around. Nothing. But when he turned back to the screen, his own image stared back at him, and it was smiling. The door unlocked on its own, and Mark ran out. He never attended another team meeting. Later, he learned the conference room used to be a storage space until a tragic accident during construction. No one could explain how the video feed had turned on, or why it only worked that one time. The office plant. It started with a harmless tradition. Every department kept a communal plant, and it was someone's job to water it daily. Emily took over caring for the plant after Greg, her co-worker, went on medical leave. Greg had always talked about how the plant seemed to thrive on attention, almost like it needed someone near it to stay alive. Emily thought nothing of it until one morning when she found a small object nestled in the soil, a button, shiny and black, just like the one Greg always wore on his jacket. Thinking it was a coincidence, she threw it away. Over the next week, she began finding other strange objects, a pen cap, a torn piece of fabric, even a tooth. Each object looked old, worn, and oddly familiar, like they belonged to someone in the office. One night, staying late, Emily decided to investigate. She dug through the soil, but the further she went, the worse the smell became, like rotting meat. Her hand hit something solid. She pulled out what looked like a bone, yellowed and splintered. Terrified, she stopped digging and replaced the soil. The next day, Greg's supervisor informed the team that he'd been declared missing. As Emily glanced at the plant, she could have sworn it had grown taller overnight. The new intern. Maggie was assigned to mentor the new intern, Liam. He was polite, eager to learn, but something about him felt off. He always stood too close and never seemed to blink enough. Whenever Maggie tried to joke with him, he didn't laugh, he just stared, unblinking, like he was trying to figure out why it was funny. One day, Maggie found an old photo tucked into the drawer of her desk, which had been reassigned from someone else. It was a group picture of the staff, taken years before she'd started. Liam was in it, looking exactly the same, down to his clothes. She confronted him the next morning. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Liam tilted his head and smiled. "I like it here. People don't notice if you blend in." Terrified, Maggie went to HR. They dismissed her concerns, claiming no record of an intern named Liam. When she returned to her desk, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "You're fun to watch." She turned around, but Liam was gone. No one had seen him leave. The elevator. The elevator in Alex's office building was old and unreliable. It rattled loudly, and employees often joked about getting stuck in it. One evening, Alex decided to leave work late and found himself alone in the elevator. As the doors closed, they suddenly jerked open again, but no one was there. Shrugging it off, Alex pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator started to descend but stopped abruptly on the 7th floor. The doors opened, revealing an empty, dark hallway. Confused, Alex pressed the close door button, but the elevator didn't move. Instead, the lights flickered, and a low hum filled the small space. "Help!" Alex shouted, hitting the emergency button. But the only response was static, followed by faint whispers. They were too soft to understand, but they grew louder, overlapping until it sounded like dozens of people speaking at once. Suddenly, the elevator jolted, and Alex fell to the floor. When the doors opened again, he stumbled out, but he wasn't in the lobby. The walls were covered in black smudges, and the air smelled of burnt metal. A handprint, large and smeared, was visible on the control panel. The elevator dinged behind him, the doors closing on their own. Alex refused to ever ride it again. The birthday cupcakes. Janice loved baking and brought cupcakes to the office every time there was a birthday. She prided herself on her recipes, but recently, people stopped eating them. No one said why, but whispers about a strange taste circulated. One day, Janice overheard two co-workers talking in hushed tones. "I'm telling you, they smell like dirt," one said. The other nodded. "And at one time, I bit into something crunchy." Determined to prove them wrong, Janice took one of her own cupcakes and bit into it. She froze. It wasn't chocolate chips or sprinkles, it was glass. Tiny, jagged shards, hidden in the frosting. Janice stared at the rest of the batch, heart pounding. As she picked up another cupcake to inspect it, a folded piece of paper fell out. It read, "Happy birthday, Janice. We've been waiting for you." Janice hadn't told anyone it was her birthday. The locked office. After a round of layoffs, one office in the building was locked and left unused. Employees joked it was haunted because people swore they'd hear typing or see shadows moving inside when no one was there. One night, Tony, the IT guy, was working late when his computer pinged with an unusual request, a file transfer from the locked office. Curious, he went to investigate. The door was unlocked, though it shouldn't have been, and inside, the desk was pristine except for an old desktop computer. Its screen glowed faintly. As Tony stepped closer, the screen blinked, and a message appeared, "Help me." He froze, unsure if it was a prank. "Who's there?" he asked aloud. The screen flickered again, and this time, the words changed, "You're next." Tony bolted, leaving the office unlocked. The next morning, the IT team checked the logs, but there was no record of any file transfer or computer in that room. When Tony returned to look for the desktop, it was gone, but the locked office was bolted shut again, as if no one had been there in years. The office mirror. In the break room, there was a large mirror above the sink. Everyone complained about it. It was old, warped, and made everyone look a little off. But what bothered Jenna most was that she swore she'd seen people in the mirror who weren't in the room. One day, she stayed late and went to grab some water from the break room. As she filled her cup, she caught movement in the mirror. A shadow darted behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, her reflection wasn't her own. The figure looked like her, but its eyes were darker, its smile wider. It tilted its head and mouthed words Jenna couldn't hear. She stepped closer, trying to make it out. The reflection whispered, "Switch places with me." Jenna screamed and ran, refusing to ever step into the break room again. The mirror. It shattered the next morning, though no one admitted to breaking it. The whispering file cabinet. In a small office, the metal filing cabinets were crammed with decades of old documents. Emily, the newest employee, was assigned the mind-numbing task of reorganizing them. She worked in the back room alone, sifting through dusty folders, when she began to hear whispers. At first, she thought it was the air conditioning. But the whispers grew louder, distinct, as if voices were having a muffled conversation inside the cabinet. She leaned closer, heart pounding. "Hello?" she whispered. The voices stopped. Then, from the cabinet closest to her, she heard a single word, "Stay." Emily stumbled backward and bolted out of the room. She refused to return, and the office eventually hired a temp to finish the task. One day, the temp didn't show up. His belongings were found by the cabinet, along with an empty folder labeled "Termination." No one ever figured out what happened to him, or who had whispered. The personal space invader. Gates' co-worker, Dave, was known for being a little odd. He'd stand too close, pop up behind people silently, and never seemed to respect personal boundaries. But one day, he crossed the line. Gate was alone in the office late, finishing a project. She felt a presence behind her and assumed it was Dave, since he was always lurking. "You scared me," she said, turning around. No one was there. Shaking it off, she kept working. Minutes later, she felt a hand on her shoulder. This time, she spun her chair around quickly, only to find no one again. Her pulse raced as she stood to check the empty office. The next morning, she confronted Dave about being so intrusive. His response chilled her. "I wasn't in the office last night. I went home at 5. Kate stared at him, speechless. The handprints on her shoulder told a different story. The new workstation. The company decided to repurpose the basement storage room into a new workstation, and Max was assigned to move in. The space smelled damp, and the single fluorescent light buzzed annoyingly. But what really unsettled Max was the old desk left behind, covered in faint carvings that looked like scratches. The words "Get Out" were etched in uneven letters on the underside. Max laughed it off as a prank, but things quickly grew worse. His computer froze constantly, with strange error messages popping up, "Leave now or I see you." The IT team brushed it off as malware, but the messages never stopped. One evening, Max found a photo pinned to the cork board above the desk. It showed him sitting at the desk, but it wasn't taken that day. He was wearing a shirt he'd thrown out weeks ago. In the background of the photo, a shadowy figure loomed. Max quit that same week. The desk remains empty. The Vanishing Act. It started with little things. Kyle, the new guy in accounting, never joined for lunch, never made small talk, and somehow always managed to slip out of meetings without anyone noticing. No one paid much attention. Some people are just shy, right? But then, Monica noticed something strange. She stayed late one evening to finish a report and heard someone walking around, their footsteps heavy, almost dragging. Thinking it was Kyle, she peeked into the hallway. It was empty. But when she went back to her desk, there was a sticky note on her keyboard that hadn't been there before. It read, "I see you." The next morning, Monica confronted Kyle about the note, but he just smiled and said, "You shouldn't stay late. It's not safe." She laughed it off, but her unease grew when she found out that Kyle didn't clock out that evening, or any evening for the past week. In fact, HR later confirmed that Kyle had never been properly onboarded. He wasn't even in the system. When Monica pressed her boss for answers, they avoided her questions, muttering something about how the office had been weird ever since the old accounting lead disappeared 5 years ago. Kyle? He stopped showing up entirely. But Monica swore she saw him in the reflection of her monitor late one night, watching her. The lunch thief. Everyone in the office was annoyed about the missing lunches. Whole meals would vanish from the fridge, but oddly, it was never random, just one person's food at a time, usually for weeks. At first, people joked about it. The phantom strikes again. Someone quipped when Brian's lasagna disappeared. Then came the incident with Amanda. For weeks, her salads kept disappearing, so she decided to add a note to her next meal. "This is Amanda's. Do not eat." When it disappeared anyway, she replaced the note with another, "I hope you enjoy the laxatives I added." The lunch thief didn't steal again for 3 days. But on the 4th day, Amanda found her container back in the fridge, with her salad untouched but smeared in what looked like blood. Taped to the top was a photo of Amanda at her desk, taken from behind. She reported it to HR, but no cameras covered the break room. They told her it was probably just a prank. The next week, Amanda quit. Weeks later, her replacement brought in a meal with their name on it. It vanished the next day.